Today we are going over the history of competitive Pokemon's most defining item, leftovers. When you start playing in-game Pokemon, then you don't really think about held items because who cares, you don't really need them. But when you get to that Snorlax in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and you see it recovering its health without even doing anything, you start to think, hey, those leftovers it's holding, those might be pretty good. And then, like, the one held item you put on your team, you give your starter leftovers, pretty much. Because who knew in a game where, you have to maintain your own HP while bringing down the opponent's HP, an item that gives you your HP back is actually pretty good. So, that's the basic idea in competitive, and we're not going to be going over why. Actually, it's very important for a defensive Pokemon, which takes a lot of hits to maintain its health, because, obviously. But we're instead really going over how leftovers were used in more interesting cases. Like, I'm not going to spend a million years talking about Blissey uses leftovers because of course Blissey uses leftovers. What else would it use? But instead we're going to take more interesting uses or non-uses of leftovers even into account. So we start with GSC, and Blissey leftovers, Cloister leftovers, pretty much everything runs leftovers in GSC. That's the stereotype, right? Every item used in GSC is leftovers because there aren't many other good items, and the only real exception is Marowak, which is unique because it needs Thick Club for that signature sky-high attack stat that it is known for. And that's generally true, and so it is and it isn't true. So the reason it is true is because the other items are not really that impressive. You have you don't really have strong boosting items. No choice items, no life orb, and the boosting items that do exist, the type-based ones. Your charcoal, mystic water, all that kind of stuff, they only give a 10% boost, which is not that big. There is some use for them, very rare, but there is, but we'll get to that. But generally they're not that impressive. And then of course there's Miracle Berry, which is the Gen 2 equivalent of Lumberry. So, wouldn't that be useful? And the answer is, again, yes, but also it's not the automatic thing that you would throw on a Pokemon in a later gen because everything's really bulky, games are generally slow, and so you're not going to get as much use out of it as you would with leftovers, especially with Sleep Talk, which calls rest in this gen. So, why bother with the one-time Miracle Berry as when you could just rest talk like everything else does. That said, a lot of the development of GSC, or not a lot of the development, but a good portion of the development of GSC in the last, let's call it a little under a decade, whatever, has been around exploring some of these items. And it's not like there was some sort of revolution, like, every Gengar runs Never Melt Ice now. It doesn't, I just made that up. But there have been some very cool examples. And a lot of that has revolved around GSC becoming more offensive. Once players... I have a video about this if you want to check it out, about why GSC is not all stall, and why offense is actually sometimes a little overwhelming. Not really, but it's a very strong playstyle. It is the defining, dominant, whatever you want to call it. So, and where did this start? Well, it started with Thief Spam, because another common option for your item slot is to not run any item at all, and to just run Thief. And then you get to steal your opponent's leftovers, because they will be running 6 Pokemon with leftovers, most likely. And then you get leftovers on your Pokemon, and they've lost leftovers on one of theirs. It's pretty awesome. So Thief and GSC could be its own video, so I won't go too much into that. But these teams play at a fast pace, which is uncharacteristic to a lot of GSC, or was, rather. So that kind of shook things up a little. It didn't completely revolutionize the metagame. Some players treated it a bit too much like a modern gen, like, Stall can't stand up to Thief spam, and I have to watch out for matchup. And it's like, all right, it's not that extreme. This is a pretty stable gen. If a Stall team is completely collapsing to Thief spam, something's wrong. Whether the team, the battle, the both, or a team that's playing both. But anyway, so the big Thief users are Exeggutor, Gengar, Nidoking. Nidoking's a really, really big one. Especially because these Pokemon obviously usually run leftovers, and especially at the beginning of a game, then you don't know, are they going to Thief or are they just going to be a regular set? And of course, even once spikes go down and you see once they switch in, it has leftovers, it doesn't have leftovers, that means it's running Thief, then even if you know it's coming, it can still be a pain. But then there are some alternate item options that can mess with Thief. And we'll get to those in a sec. I wanted to highlight that. And once Jinx started becoming popular, and there's a video on why Jinx became popular in GSC that I have too. Once Jinx became popular, then it also started running Thief as well. And it's pretty simple. When King Snorlax really relies on its leftovers, then you run a special attacker that forces Snorlax in, and then you steal its lefties. And oh, wow, it's not nearly as durable when it's not passively healing. Part of what makes Snorlax and everything so bulky effectively is that, it avoids a 3 KO or a 4 KO or whatever because of the accumulated healing of leftovers. Like 6.25% does not seem like that much on any one given turn, but, then it's 12.5, then it's 18.75, then it's 25. So that's what in games that go long, then obviously accumulated lefties healing is really big. So to remove that obviously accelerates the game a lot. So we started seeing a bunch of Thief stuff, and then inspired by this Thief stuff, then we started seeing more offense, experimenting with what items were possible. One of my favorite inventions was Miracle Berry Cloister, which on really fast-paced teams, when you're facing a bunch of stuff with status, sometimes Snorlax likes to throw out Lovely Kiss, sometimes Body Slam Paralysis is annoying. Sometimes you don't want to. You need to be able to absorb a sleep from Exeggutor really quick. You want to be able to stay in on Nidoking at full health. So all sorts of stuff. Because in those fast-paced games where there's lots of explosion as well, then you're not going to be making the use out of leftovers, because the longer the game goes on, then that's the more tired out your team is getting. The weaker you are, the more the door is closing on your opportunity to break through the opponent's defense. So you want to move fast, and Miracle Berry lets you play fast in the same way that you would in a later gen. Obviously, this is not applicable to every style of team, just these kinds of teams that go against most of what GSC has historically been and play aggressively. But, of course, it can work, because it can change the tide of the game. Miracle Berry Exeggutor has seen similar use. And another nice thing about Miracle Berry and non-leftovers items in general is that if you switch them into a Thief or something, then the opposing Pokemon, like a Nidoking, is not stealing leftovers. And I'm not saying it getting Miracle Berry is bad or anything, but it's not going to have the leftovers that it needs. So now it's also on a timer, because usually the thieving Pokemon, at least in part, benefits from having improved longevity over the Pokemon it's thieving from, or its teammate appreciates it in some way. Like even if Nidoking doesn't mind Skarmory being thieved because Nidoking beats Skarmory anyway, but a teammate of its like Snorlax might appreciate it. So yeah, that's the general idea. So not having leftovers. And of course, there were some teams that had like thief wars, where they would thief back and forth a bunch of times with their executors, and sometimes even Skarmories, even though Thief Skarm is a real relic, or Jinxes. Thief is actually the strongest move that Jinx has to hit Jinx with, in most cases. So, yeah, where are we going from here? Yeah, I'm just making sure I have all of the Miracle Berry stuff covered. There have been... before that, Miracle Berry was pretty much limited to Baton Pass stuff, which was, obviously its own thing. Like Smeargle was also would also regularly run Miracle Berry, even when it was running its Spike set and not a Trap Pass or a Baton Pass kind of thing. And that was because, what plays at a faster pace than Smeargle? Smeargle has no longevity or bulk at all. So that was the one exception to the commonly runs Miracle. Yeah, Smeargle runs Miracle Berry more than any other item, in fact. So that's one for that. And now for the boosting items. So these are definitely the rarest, and in fact the most common example is on Moltres, not even OU Pokemon. But the reason is, actually Moltres is quite good against Nidoking defensively, because it's faster, threatens with Fire Blast, and its Sunny Day ruins Nidoking's Thunder accuracy, as well as the accuracy of the Thunders from the Electrics in the tier. The set is Fire Blast, Sunny Day, Rest, and Sleep Talk, and it's and the item it runs is Charcoal. And now we earlier said 10% is not that much. That's true in most cases. Moltres is the exception because it generally gets its job done without lefties. In terms of Nidoking, because part of why and Exeggutor is the other one, obviously, where it doesn't really. If Nidoking or Exeggutor steal Charcoal, then it's like, okay, well, no lefties for you. And it stifles them pretty well, as long as it plays halfway decently, of course. But it's also trying to be as big an offensive threat as possible. And Sunny Day Charcoal Moltres can 2-hit KO Snorlax with Fire Blast. It needs a little bit of chip damage, obviously, but that's not hard with spikes and whatever. If you force Snorlax to rest, then, it's in real trouble. So that's why Moltres' go-to item is Charcoal. It's the only Pokemon whose go-to item, whose standard is a boosting one in this gen. That I can think. I don't think there's anything else really. Scrolling through just to make sure, but yeah, I'm pretty sure that's it. There are some other examples, like sometimes we've seen stuff like Belly Drum Charizard with Hyper Beam, the Georgie special, which its goal is to go so over the top. It uses it as an explosion, basically, because it's going to be KO'd after. But it's so strong that with +6 and so 999 attack, the max in GSC, and Silk Scarf, which is actually no, Silk Scarf doesn't exist in Gen 2. Sorry, it's Pink Bow or Polka Dot Bow. There's two of them. Then you are able to take out things like Snorlax and Suicune, and even something like Vaporeon, which you never would with the standard of Earthquake and Rock Slide. Now, obviously, standard Bellizard is supposed to take care of those pokes in different ways, but if you want to lure them in and just blast them apart, so you play more like a wall breaker than an endgame sweeper, then that is an option. But it's definitely not the standard in the same way that Moltres' Sunny Rest Talk set runs Charcoal. And as far as, there are some players who ran Magnet Zapdos, and I actually quite like that set. If you don't need to run Rest Talk on Zapdos, which, to be fair, is most of the time, but if you're running one of those really aggressive Thief Spam teams, then Magnet Zapdos is really great. Because what's one of the most common things in GSC? Snorlax thundering, Zapdos, Thundering, Snorlax. And, I mean, it's like, God, if there's anything worth pushing for that little extra percentage on, it's that. And, I mean, obviously, you'd have to build your team around it, because when you give up on Rest Talk, and you give up on a lot of defensive utility that Zapdos otherwise brings to a team. But, yeah, doing 30% minimum to Lax is kind of huge. It gets put under some real bad pressure with spikes down, and it's brutal. So, yeah, Magna Zapdos is sometimes used. And the only other one, I don't know why more people don't use this, but I really like Never Melt Ice Jinx, because Jinx is a Pokemon. I mean, talk about better the shorter the game is, and you want as many OHKOs, or not necessarily OHKOs, but just you want to increase your damage ranges as much as possible, and you really just want to hit really hard. And when Ice Beam comes just short on something, it just kills me. I like to go all the way and run Blizzard sometimes. That's also a little extreme, but Jinx is flexible. That's the whole idea of how it's kind of a little like a Cloister on those really offensive teams where it's like, yeah, are leftovers really helping here? Again, I have to stress, this is only on really, really aggressive teams. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Okay, so that's GSC and leftovers or lack thereof. In GSC, it's really just obviously leftovers, longer the game, blah, blah, blah. So really, it's about when you don't use leftovers. That's notable. And obviously, Marowak. I mean, we mentioned that already, but Marowak is special for the, because Marowak pretty much unless you're running, again, a really aggressive team, then Marowak pretty much necessitates rapid spin support, because otherwise it's not passively healing off those ever-present spikes. Marowak without spikes can take 2 hidden powers from Zapdos. Marowak with spikes cannot. Again, no leftovers, so you got to have that spin support, stuff like that. It's a big... These are the nuances. All right, we move on to Generation. Let me just check everything's... Yes, it looks like it's going fine. 3. All right, so Generation 3 brings it brings a lot of things. First of all, it brings more items. The biggest ones are Pinch Berries, so like Salic and Pitaya, Lychee, and Choice Band. And Choice Band is the really big one that you can slap on your strong physical attackers. So it's now generally, if you just have 2 items to choose from, it's either leftovers or Choice Band. Fun fact, people actually didn't used to distinguish between them that much. Like, I remember some players used to talk about Flygon, and they would use it the exact same way, and some players were just like, oh, I just prefer leftovers to Choice Band, as if it wasn't a completely different Pokemon like that. And I thought that was really cool. It made me look at it a little differently. So, because, usually you think, oh, Banders are so different, but anyway. So, so you have Choice Banders, and then you have some Pinchberry stuff, like Salic Berry Heracross is the most prominent example. But for the most part, you have leftovers. And the thing about leftovers here is now they are, not necessary in a lot of cases, but they're not here to give you your health back as much as prevent you from getting put on an immediate timer by Tyranitar Sandstorm. And that's really big. I mean, because it's big even on offensive Pokemon. Because you would think, oh, well, if there was no Sandstorm, I think a lot of offensive Calm Minders would definitely, like Suicune and Celebi, would definitely prefer to run some sort of different item, like, a boosting item, a Pinchberry, Lumberry even for Suicune. Yeah, but I'm sure I'm missing out on something. But you can't, because then you're just losing health in Sandstorm, and with how common Protect is, especially, you can't have that. That's why stuff like Moltres, which is almost purely offense, still runs leftovers. Why would you just let what's it called? a Sandstorm wear you down. You can't have that, and that's a big part of what shapes the tier. And especially because you're not healing, you're just not getting worn down. This is nowhere is this bigger than on Gengar, which avoids taking hits just so it can stay at a certain range. Because as soon as it gets knocked, below 100% or whatever the percent is that you need it to take, then it starts getting put in. It drops in. Gengar is usually just out of range of one specific attack it needs to take. Most commonly, T-Tar, Pursuit, or Crunch, or +1 DD Salamence HP Flying. Those are the big ones. Then you can throw in other stuff like, Starmie Psychic or whatever, but those two are the big ones. Moltres Fire Blast. And leftovers are a big part of that. I mean, I'm sure Gengar would love to run something like Lumberry, and so it could trade Will-O-Wisp with other Gengar, or not get immediately ruined by a Thunder Wave. But no, you can't have that. And in a sandless metagame, well, the biggest difference is the survivability of Snorlax and Suicune, which their survivability is so terrible in sand, because these are these incredibly bulky Pokemon who take barely anything from hits, but they have to rely on rest for recovery, and they're pretty slow and not immediately threatening, and they really take a while to get going. And so you hit them, and then they're forced to rest. And whereas, remember in GSC where you have that thing about how Snorlax is bulky because it's bulky, obviously, but it also gets leftovers. So you think, oh, I have a 4-hit KO. Never mind, it's a 5-hit KO. That's a huge difference. And it's the same thing here. If there's no sand, then Lax and Suicune are borderline immortal, and that's why there are a lot of teams built around trying to get that kind of situation, removing T-Tar and changing the weather. So every single sand-affected Pokemon is not obligated to run leftovers, but usually does. There are some exceptions, my favorite being Choice Band Salamence, which is an absolute monster, but obviously there are issues that go with that. So, and most other sand-affected Pokemon don't bother, with the exception of a Salicberry Heracross, which at least that can turn into its advantage. But actually, speaking of turning that to an advantage, something like Charizard actually likes being hit and holding leftovers and not gaining HP in sand, because that gets it closer to Blaze range. So if it can switch into like a weak Psychic or a Metagross Meteor Mash, then it's like, yes, I actually like it. It's a very unique facet of Advance. But what's really noticeable is, of course, the sand immune Pokemon, because these are the ones who are most definitively immortal. The exception is, of course, Blissey, because it takes so little from the moves it switches into, and it has instant reliable recovery. If Suicune and Snorlax had Recover, then they would be as immortal as Milotic, who is famously immortal. But for sand-affected Pokemon, obviously, because of that instant recovery. But most of the Pokemon that are difficult to KO are the ones who, and again, I have a video on passive damage here, but you really notice the effect of leftovers when something like bulky Flygon or Swampert and Skarmory are the most famous examples, just protecting for their leftovers. I mean, if Blissey protects in sand, what does it do? Nothing. That's why Blissey doesn't run Protect in advance. Yeah, okay, Toxic or whatever, but generally, Scouting Choice Banders, sure. There is room for Protect on Blissey, but it has a hard time fitting it. So, point being, Skarmory and Swampert, they protect just to get the lefties. Very few Pokemon can actually do that. Or Metagross, that's another great example. But being sand immune is a big deal. Or Jirachi, that's a huge one. Half the reason... So, Heracross is, one of the biggest offensive threats in Advance. And its biggest flaw is getting worn down by sand, because people want to run cool items like Salicberry and Choice Band and Lumberry, or Chesto Berry for stupid Hypnosis Gengar, while still getting the Guts boost from Will-O-Wisp. So Yeah, but then eventually people realized actually the best item for this offensive Pokemon with, limited defensive capabilities, if any, is actually leftovers. Why? Well, what's the number one way of playing around Heracross? You switch around, you try to not die while it gets worn down by sand. That's it. And once you put leftovers on that Heracross, a lot of defensive teams crumple. They can't handle it at all. So, leftovers is not just... That's the best example of why leftovers is not just the item for stall nonsense. I don't even know why I call it nonsense. Stall is not nonsense. This is all the Zoomer propaganda I've been hearing for the actually no, I don't. I take that back. I don't even blame it on Zoomers. I blame it on the late Gen 5, early Gen 6 people who had this weird vendetta against stall. All that brainwashing has subtly got to me. Anyway, point being, it's not just for stall Pokemon. It's even for offensive Pokemon. So, yeah, that's Gen 3 for you pretty much. I'm going to scroll through BL really quick, but yeah. So there are obviously items other than leftovers that can be used. You see a lot more Lumberry now, but most of the time, those non-leftovers items in Gen 3 are seen on sand-immune Pokemon. So T-Tar runs Lumberry on DD. Swampert runs Saligberry on offensive sets. Metagross runs Choice Band or Lumberry or Saligberry. Magneton runs Magnet or Saligberry. There's some other examples, but I'm not going to run into everything. Choice Band Flygon is underrated. Yeah, there's some exceptions. Like, I still love Pitaya Sunny Day Charizard, but that's a rare set. And yeah, Arrow, runs nothing but Choice Band. So, or should run nothing but Choice Band, pretty much. So, yeah, that's Gen 3 for you. It's not about lefties versus non-lefties. It's about sand versus non-sand a lot of the time. Obviously, even, sand-immune Pokemon. I mean, what else does Skarmory run? Or Jirachi most of the time. So, but that gives you the general idea. And Salamence is really the best the best sand-affected Pokemon that cannot run leftovers. So we move on to Gen 4. So we have a similar dynamic, but we have some cool new additions here. Some very cool new items. First of all, the boosting items, the type ones, like Charcoal and Mystic Water and stuff, those are 20% now. So those are an actual option in Gen 4. Then you have other cool items like Expert Belt and Life Orb. That one's actually the opposite of leftovers. But it's the alternatives of lefties that we're talking about. Then you've got the other choice items, Specs and Scarf. And a bunch of other stuff. Like, look at this thing right here, Breloom. You have the status orbs, which aren't really used, except for Breloom, which has Toxic Orb and Poison Heal, which is better than lefties, because you heal even in sand. Outside of sand, Breloom heals 2 leftovers per turn. In sand, Breloom is a sand-affected Pokemon that actually heals, which is amazing and very unique. And it also means it can't be statused in other ways. You can't Will-O-Wisp Breloom with your Rotom. No way. Yeah, so that's something very unique. But you also have leads with the more dedicated lead metagame. The lead metagame went back and evolved and advanced and stuff too. But in Gen 4, Stealth Rock made the lead metagame its own, big thing. So, in the lead position, you have a lot of stuff like. You have Lumberry, of course, too, but also Focus Sash is the most definitive one with Arrow and Azelf. And then Azelf, you have Resist Berries. That's another really big one. And offensive Slugfest, you love having that stuff like Pasho or Shuka Berry Heatran or Chople Heatran, an underrated classic. Because Life Orb Gengar Focus Blast used to melt through a lot of offensive teams, who knew? As well as stuff like Lucario and Infernape. And you just have a lot of power-based items and items that focus on stopping that power, like Colbur Azelf being a big example. So then you have, but of course you still, and then you have a widespread trick So you have stuff like Iron Ball and Macho Brace being tricked around, and that kind of hindering effect can be really irritating. So that's something Bronzong can do. But of course, leftovers are quite common. So, Life Orb and you have Pitaya and Polion, cool. But yeah, lefties is very viable on most of OU. And then, of course, other stuff like Clefable, which is still in UU, but very much an OU Pokemon. But you also have a leftovers alternative for poison types now in Black Sludge. And fun fact, throughout a lot of the current gen, then there was this idea that your poison types shouldn't run Black Sludge to punish Trick, because then the Trick user could trick it onto one of your other Pokemon, which is a fair idea, but then, people started thinking, hey, if I'm switching this into the Trick user, I'm probably going to switch it into the Trick user again, later. So if it's going to trick the Black Sludge again, then it's going to trick it back to the Pokemon that originally had it. Like if my bulky Roserade switches into a Rotom using Trick, and the Rotom gets Black Sludge, am I not going to switch my Roserade into Rotom later? Stuff like that. The Rotom could threaten the Trick on something. Yeah, come on. You're just going to switch your Roserade in anyway. So, Trick is big because it aims to remove leftovers. Like, what was one of the most common ways that people would try to ruin Blissey with special attackers in Platinum? Trick Latios, Trick Rotom, Trick Gengar sometimes even. Before people realize, that gives Scizor even more of a free switch. And, the Pursuiters were one of the most common ways of dealing with Trick. But then there was also Scarf Jirachi. Yeah, people actually used to use Trick Scarf Jirachi. It was its most popular set. And that you didn't really punish with Trick as much. Punished it with Magnezone. That's what you punished it with. Or just exchanged Scarves with Heatran and did nothing. But it was also a very disruptive Pokemon. So leftovers started. You couldn't just load up on leftovers anymore. Was the basic idea. Like previously, if you wanted to run a hardcore stall team, then even in advance, even if you had some fast Pokemon like Gengar and Starmie, you still probably had a team of 6 leftovers, right? What's the most common traditional whatever in Gen 3? You have T-Tar, Skarm, Swampert, Blissey, Gengar, +1, right? And yeah, that +1 can be Aerodactyl or Dugtrio with which one Choice Band. But the others, your Starmie, your Zapdos, your Moltres, your now Charizard, Salamence, whatever. Those are still running leftovers. And yeah, your T-Tar might not run leftovers, but it probably will, because you like longevity on that team, right? You want to use your T-Tar to switch into stuff, you want lefties on it. So that kind of team could get away with running leftovers because nothing runs Trick in advance. There are like 2 Pokemon that get it, Alakazam and Mr. Mime and something else that's pretty much nothing runs it. And plus the only real ruinous choice item they were going to be tricking was Choice Bands. You want to trick my T-Tar a Choice Band or my Metagross a Choice Band? Okay, because as soon as you see the sand affect them and them not get leftovers when they come out, mainly Alakazam, because Alakazam's actually pretty good. But you're like, all right, well, Blissey's not switching into that because it's going to trick. I'm going to, see what it wants to do first. And if it doesn't trick, then Blissey's going to handle it anyway. And it's not like it's going to be dropping stuff left and right in one turn because Advance doesn't have that level of power, so I can afford to scout it with something else. So generally, Trick sucked in Advance. But in DPP, it's a real weapon because good Pokemon have it. And there are good items with which you can trick. Like if you trick T-Tar Choice Band, it's like, oh, that's not good. But if you trick T-Tar Choice Specs, then, oh, that's actually not so good. So you had this whole thing where now stall teams started running not just Scarf Rotom, but Scarf T-Tar because it would absorb Trick. So you, and this was another development of, stall teams can't be all slow anymore. They have to have some speed. And Scarf T-Tar also brought speed to these teams, of course. but it was absorbing Trick. That was a big part of its rep, and punishing the Trick users. But even then, the Trick users could punish Scarf Tower because, T-Tar absorbed the Trick from Latias and pursued it, but it also received specs. Now that Scarf Tower doesn't have a Scarf anymore, now it's slow, so now it can't outrun my Gengar, my SD Lucario without Bullet Punch, my Infernape without Mach Punch, all that kind of stuff. My mixed Dragonite, stuff like that. So Trick became a really big deal, and Blissey had to be very afraid of it. And there were still successful stall teams without choice item, like Goki and Earthworms still had 6 leftovers, but Trick was definitely very free. And what made it particularly dangerous was that Latias and Rotom worked so well together, and they could both Trick really effectively. And so just that, because it's not like they have to use it the first turn they're out. You know, they can still use their item quite well. They get rid of it and if you're facing a stall team, you don't really need a Scarf, so you can play safely. But the threat of Trick is what's so dangerous, because as soon as Blissey loses its leftovers and gets Scarfed, I'm not saying the game is over, because that would be ridiculous, but you are in a really bad position. So that's a big pressure, or a big source of pressure you're under. So that's a big thing for lefties. Bronzong, another great Trick user. So lefties, we've got definitely started getting noticeable as the metagame became more focused on passive damage again to start playing around stuff. Then you started having offensive teams that decided, well, we don't want to get choked out so easily. We want some more longevity. So Philip7086, I think, was the first guy to use leftovers on Infernape, and it was huge because Infernape most famously KOs itself in 2 seconds with Life Orb and Sandstorm, right? Oh my god, this thing's not going down. It's actually sticking around, and yikes, terrifying. So what do you do? Well, you actually have to have an answer to it. Obviously, without Life Orb, then these threats don't have as much power, but the staying power that lets them break you down systematically over time, that's a new level of threat. So, again, Leftovers has a lot of offensive application as well. Even something like offensive Heatran always liked using lefties, especially when it was running sub. But it just not getting chunked by Stealth Rock into range of weak Thunderbolts is amazing. Actually getting to stick around. Even something like Gengar, which could use Pain Split, and famously did use Sub Split, it's like when it has Black Sludge and you can't just switch around it and try to force an exploitable turn, then that's a whole new level of danger. Like Gyarados sets without leftovers, they're strong, but they're also worn down by sand. And again, this is partially the power of sand, but you also see the benefit of sand-affected, non-sand-affected Pokemon gaining leftovers as opposed to sand-affected Pokemon not gaining leftovers. I mean, that's just the worst. When Jirachi or Clefable protects on you and your sand-affected Pokemon loses health while they're gaining, or a Breloom, which is why Breloom is so good on offense and defense. Because Breloom is a big part of this whole giving offense longevity thing, because it effectively has leftovers despite being status immune leftovers while still being sand affected. So that's why it's one reason why it's so big. So I mean, even something like a offensive Calm Mind Jirachi loved running leftovers. It could run a bunch of stuff, like Shuka Berry was popular for some time. But lefties is just, part of... It helps make even offensive Pokemon have some sort of longevity, and that's a big part of getting the most out of their offense. So, which I think is very cool for an item that is most associated with, long games and stall. Leftovers Metagross was always underappreciated until not too long ago. But yeah, that's leftovers in Gen 4 in Essentials. So then we move on to Gen 5. So Gen 5, Blissey doesn't... Actually, it was used a lot in Black and White 1, not so much in Black and White 2. Once Keldeo came around, it's like, this thing has Secret Sword. And then Chansey stopped being used too because everyone was like, oh yeah, Stall is actually kind of not good. Is it? Yes, keep playing, please. Yeah, but Stall, or not Stall, Lefties still continues to be used in Gen 5 because, well, not just because of sand, because now with the proliferation of rain, then you can actually gain leftovers. And then, of course, you have the insane Tentacruel, which gains, more than leftover, or Black Sludge, technically, with its Eternal Rain Dish. And yeah, I think here's a great example of how leftovers is big even on offensive Pokemon. When Black and White 1 was the main gen, or the current, you know what I mean. Sandrush Excadrill was the biggest threat around. It was so insanely broken. And Air Balloon or Life Orb were the most common sets, right? And those were amazing and all. But when people, it was probably going to get axed anyway because it was so obscene. But what really, really pushed it over the edge was when it started running leftovers, believe it or not. Leftovers and Rapid Spin, and suddenly Skarmory couldn't handle it well anymore. Leftover Skarmory. This was before Rocky Helmet became popular. And they were like, oh my god, it just sits on you. We can't wear it down anymore. It's just going to sit on you and spin forever. How do you deal with this? And that's, yeah. And that longevity was a big part of what made Excadrill as dangerous as it was. Not only is this an offensive threat, but it's also going to reset all your progress, and it's going to stick around. So even on a Pokemon, because Excadrill didn't invest in its bulk at all, or almost at all, even on a Pokemon with such frailty and such exploitable weaknesses, then again, leftovers, big deal. Yeah. I appreciated when Ferrothorn didn't run leftovers, personally. Not Shed Shell. I always thought Rocky Helmet was a little too underused. Like, I know leftovers are big, guys, but definitely we could make some more out of this. But yeah, besides just the spin punishing, it's just so good for U-turns and stuff. And I also enjoy Lum Ferrothorn now because Scald is stupid. Yeah, even something like Garchomp, which could run a million things with all the, talk about new great offensive options. Now we have the gems, those paragons of brokenness. But even something like a sub-SD Garchomp, back when it was abusing Sandvale, then Leftovers was the best option because it gives you so many opportunities to grab that sub. So, yeah. Oh, Gliscor doesn't have to run lefties anymore because it also gets Poison Heal because someone decided it needed to be even better than it already was. Yeah. Other than that, you have a good balance now of, well, even defensive teams recognize, yeah, we need something fast. You have more stuff like Focus Ash, Alakazam, but yeah. Oh, a great example. Expert Belt Keldeo became like Keldeo's defining set for a while because when this thing, this actually has pretty good coverage, contrary to what everyone thought at first. And when it switches moves and it's not locked in with a choice item, it's really hard to deal with. And when Expert Belt came along, it's like, oh my god, this set is impossible. And eventually people realize, hey, it doesn't really need the power of this Expert Belt. And, Sandstorm's kind of annoying. Oh, Leftovers, perfect. Yeah, now you can't just protect with Heatran and watch Keldeo lose 6%. Now you protect with Heatran, congrats, you're still in Secret Sword range, and Keldeo hasn't lost anything. It's a big deal. Because, Keldeo doesn't really need the help with power. And when you remove the possibility of passive damage and just switching around and protecting as a way of dealing with an offensive Pokemon, that makes such a huge difference. So there's that. Offensive Lando Therian. Offensive Landorus, just Landorus. I don't want to call it Landorus Incarnate. To me, it's just Landorus. But offensive Landorus in Black and White 1, before it had Sheer Force, then it commonly ran Leftovers as its item, just because it wants to stick around and smack down against Skarmory and stuff like that. So it doesn't want to get chipped by Stealth Rock and have be put in range of dumb stuff it shouldn't be in range of, like Celebi Giga Drain. Oh, now you actually have to directly hit it with, and a lot of the stuff that it can directly hit it doesn't like switching into comfortably. So you remove that possibility of, I'm just going to switch around with Stealth Rock and then eventually it'll be in range of my dumb Celebi Giga Drain. No, not anymore. Now that really made it so much harder to deal with, because it was not getting chipped. And again, it really didn't need any help with with power. We even see something like this with modern substitute Mamoswines often using Leftovers. They also like to run Never Melt Ice, obviously, and that's generally a little better. But Lefties has a lot of merit too. It makes you have to engage it more directly in order to deal with it, and that's really big. Yeah. Another classic example. Non-lefties Politoed was always so easy to win the Weather War with, comically so, because T-Tar just was like, okay, well, I switched in and now you lost health, and so that's why lefties Politoed was always by far the best at going the distance. As cool as some other sets were, then yeah. And yeah, I think that's actually it. Lefties Thunderous Therian. It's a similar example. Thunderous Therian is actually a great example because it functions on rain. It doesn't even plant. Well, okay, first of all, it does fight sand a lot, so it does act as another Keldeo-esque example of, I actually want these leftovers just so sand can't switch around me. So that's already a big one. But even on rain, when facing rain, it doesn't need the power as much, and it likes having lefties so it can dish out, or it can set up those subs, or so it, again, isn't in range of dumb, weak stuff like, Tentacruel Scald. So, yeah. Volcarona with lefties, another example of the exact same type of idea, although, it generally prefers to go for more aggressive options. So where did I end up? Yeah, okay. Now we go to Gen 6, and we see more regenerator stuff. We see, we see more megas, obviously, so that's another non-lefties item that we start seeing. But generally lefties still quite active. You don't want to trick lefties as much. Now you knock lefties off. Now you have stuff like Slowbro, or even Rotom, which you kind of count on. Well, it depends on your team. Like with, if you have Gliscor or something, then you can absorb something like a Torn Therian knock until it has HP Ice, and then you are going to have to resort to, how many teams or games have you seen where the Clefable or the Slowbro or the Rotom or, whatever else I can't even think of right now, just accepts getting knocked off. Or Ferrothorn, that's another big one. A knockoff buff that have actually, we can go back to Gen 5 for a sec, because Ferrothorn started knocking each other off in Gen 5 because it was so stupid to deal with. They were like, all right, well, if we're going to fight each other like this, then we better, at least make sure we don't get lefties. And yeah, that's pretty much that. And Gliscor also wanted to spam knockoff like that, but then it got walled by other Gliscor, so other sets had to come to the forefront. But Ferrothorn, no. If Ferrothorn's going to fight Ferrothorn all the time, then knock off. And knockoff is also big in Generation... is obviously way bigger in Generation 6, more common as that power boost. And that's why you see all the walls I just mentioned, or Alomomola whenever that's popular, or whenever that was popular before, then that was a really big one. And so you have to have these walls, which are like totally ready to lose their leftovers. Yeah, and that's why you like having things like Slowbro, which has Regenerator and Slack Off. Um, even something like Road and Paint Split can get the job done, but it can also be a pain. And there are some things where you really can't afford to have that happen. Like if your Heatran gets knocked off, it's like, all right, well, good night, because that's not healing at all. Whereas, something like Slowbro or Clefable can still heal itself. So you still have that. And, you don't have leftovers on offensive pokes. I mean, I guess Superior, but I don't know if that really counts. But with Assault Vest, you also have that happen. You also have that as another lefties alternative. But yeah, like Weavile and stuff spamming knockoff, then it can be pretty tough. So, yeah. And leftovers being knocked off is a big part of offense because, hey, kind of like Thief and GSC, hey, let's get rid of these lefties, and then suddenly my Mega Metagross is even harder to deal with. I mean, Slowbro switching into Mega Metagross or Mega Metachan without lefties, not a fun prospect. So, there's that. There's even stuff like, I had something else, but I think, lefties on offensive Pokemon. Yeah, you don't see these as much. I mean, Calm Mind Keldeo sometimes, I guess, but I mean, you lose the lefties as soon as you switch into Bisharp or Weavile knockoff, which is one of Keldeo's biggest defensive duties. So like, this may as well run specs and be more immediately threatening. And lefties on offensive stuff. You see like lefties offensive Heatran, which is still very cool, and sometimes on Tailglow Manaphy, just again that anti-passive damage thing. But, yeah, I'm kind of fading at this point. And so, yes, it's gone on for quite a while. So, we will... Thunderous. I really like lefties, even on off, really aggressive variants of Thunderous for the exact same reason. I mean, even if with Sand not being permanent anymore, just like little chip damage, staying out of range of things like Clefable Moonblast is just so big. So... but obviously there are lots of cool item options in general, even for offensive Pokemon. You can throw on stuff like Rocky Helmet. And so there are more and more non-lefties options than ever before. And we can go on to Gen 7, which, I don't really, care for as much. But it's the same thing pretty much, but you also have Z moves thrown in the mix. And... and then Gen 8 has like heavy duty boots, which I noticed replaced leftovers on a lot of defensive Pokemon because, you could have lefties prevent, help you heal off little like hazard chip damage, or you could have boots just remove it in general, or prevent it in general. Gotta say, leftover still feels more right to me because I don't like having to heal off that the actual Pokemon attack damage manually, but then again, I don't know or care much for Gen 8. So I think we're pretty much going to call it there. So thank you guys for watching. I hope this was informative for you in some way, shape, or form. If there are any questions, you can just ask them. So thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.